Jonathan and I thought it would be fun to put together a video of something that I teach my students, which is some different ways to understand creation and a couple of different theories and ways that people interpret Genesis 1. So buckle up. This is there's six of them, but this is one of my favorite things actually that I get to teach and get to talk through. So I'm really excited to get to go through this content. So, the first thing that we want to remind ourselves is where Christians get this idea of creation in the first place. And it's from the Bible, it's from the very first book. And in fact, it's the very first chapter, Genesis chapter 1. And if you're not as familiar, Genesis chapter 1 is set up over the course of these 6 days. And over the course of these 6 days, God creates everything. And if you grew up in the church, you did the Sunday school thing right now, you are maybe racking your brain, going like, oh, I know somewhere in there God creates the sun. Like, does he create that first? And then at some point there's like birds. So I'm going to give you an easy way to remember the 6 days of Genesis 1, and then we'll talk about some of the different ways Christians have, over the course of time, interpreted those days. So, okay, last chance. Try and get it in your brain. What do you think the order was? 6 days of creation, 1 day of rest? All right, there they are. Yeah, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It talks about the earth being formless and void, and the Spirit of God hovering over the surface of the deep. And then it says, God said, let there be light. And there was light, and it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And so we get into this day by day pattern. So you can see day one talks about God creating light and dark. Day two talks about God creating seas and the sky, or the waters above the firmament or above the vault, and the waters beneath the vault. Day three, there's land that comes forth and plants that are growing on the land. On day four, God creates the sun and the moon and the stars, and he gives them a job, he says, to govern the times and the seasons. On day five, God creates birds and fish. And on day six, God creates all the other land animals, wild animals, livestock, and humans. And humans are like the pinnacle of creation. God creates mankind in his image. And then on day seven, he rests. All right, so here's how this is gonna help you. Here's how we're gonna remember it. If you look at day one, what does God create? He creates light, by extension, dark. Okay, and then you look right below it on day four, what does he create? The sun, the moon, and the stars, the things that we associate with light. Okay, on day two, God creates the seas and the sky. And then look right below it, what does God create on day five? Birds and fish, the things that live in the sea and the sky. Okay, and then on day three, God creates land and plants. What does he create on day six? Animals that live on the land, humans that live on the land. All right, so there's a little bit of a parallel going on. And we'll talk more about that as we get to some of our theories. But just to remind ourselves, like, this is the biblical account. This is the Genesis narrative. And it talks about God creating these things in this order. And so one of the questions we're going to be asking ourselves as we go through these different theories is, how does the theory reconcile God creating the world in this order? Because what might stand out to you, if you are maybe less familiar with the church, or you grew up outside of a Christian environment, or you've just like taken a science class or watched a science TV show, gone to a science museum, this is not the order that people outside of Christianity often associate with how life came to be on Earth and how all things were, um, you know, came out of or evolved over time. This is a different order of events. And so the different theories have to kind of account for that in how they explain this chapter. Now, one more thing I want to say before we get into the specific theories. I'm not a science teacher. Like, whenever I teach this to my students, I always start with that. I don't teach science. There are very, very smart people who teach science. And so I highly recommend that you go and search them out on the YouTubes to find out more about the scientific explanation of how things came to be. We're not actually concerned about that in this video. What we're looking at is, how do Christians interpret Genesis 1? And that necessarily is involved with science, because some Christians think that the two help interpret each other in different ways. But this is not primarily a science video. So I'm sorry if you're looking for a science video, go away. But if you're here and you're interested in what does the Bible say, how should Christians understand it? How can maybe we understand it better? Here we go.